What's up, bookworms? This is Megan coming at you with another Cantina Conversation. Today's episode features a chat with author Heather Frese. We're talking about her book, The Saddest Girl on the Beach, that's available now. I really enjoyed this conversation with Heather. She was really authentic, and we were shooting the shit about the messiness of friendships and about life in general, and just how our own personal experiences with grief can just affect how we live our day to day lives. But either way, I'll let you guys get to it. Here is Heather. So today we've got Heather Frese. We are talking about The Saddest Girl on the Beach. That book is available now. Heather, thanks so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed meeting your characters, even though they're a couple of them hot messes, made some questionable decisions, but I really just enjoyed where you went with it and with the whole story. It was really entertaining and I was invested in the outcome. So I'm excited to unpack all that today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, perfect. Absolutely. So, before we get started, can you give like a summary of the book so that people can follow along with the conversation?
Sure. So my protagonist's name is Charlotte, and she is 19 years old. She has just started college, and her father has just died. Um, she lives in Ohio, and she has gone off to college and done what everyone wanted her to do. And then her best friend calls to say that she's pregnant, who's her best friend is also 19. Her best friend happens to have parents who live and run an inn on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And so Charlotte just does what we all would like to do in these moments of grief, which is just run away to the beach. And she quits school and runs off down to the Outer Banks. She for the first time starts to deal with her grief and deals with her grief in questionably good ways. She starts having messy romantic relationships. She processes through things, and that's where the book starts. That's where things take off.
Yeah, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, just a questionable choices, but like we said, she's 19, right? So
She's 19, and if she made really good choices, it would be a boring story.
absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I remember just getting to know her as a character, and you really helped readers tap into her psyche at the
Yeah.
time, where obviously we'll unpack all that because
Mhm.
she's obviously the loss of a really close loved one, such like an intimate person in her life is people grief comes in waves, people deal with it differently. So you really did a good I really appreciated how you helped the reader tap into that. And then also from an objective point of view, because I was like, "Girl, come on." But then I was also like, "No, I get it." Yeah. Before we get all into that, can you go into your background a little bit? Because I know this story is a standalone, but it pairs with another book, and then but you
Right.
also done a bunch of short stories, right? Can you just go into your background a little bit, and then maybe what led you to bring Charlotte's story to the world?
Mhm. Yeah, my first novel was the Lee Smith Novel Prize, and that came out in 2021, and that was The Baddest Girl on the Planet, which Evie's story, who's Charlotte's best friend. So these two are companion books. They can be read independently, like you don't have to have read one to understand the other, but if you read both of them, you'll get a fuller picture of the world and the universe, seeing things from the other point of view characters. So yeah, I have done short stories and essays, and The Saddest Girl on the Beach was actually the first novel that I drafted, and then I put it away for a really long time because I wasn't ready, like emotionally ready to revise it, honestly. And so I started The Baddest Girl on the Planet, and like that one was just like it was just fun and straight, like really joyful to dip into that character's mindset. And I published that one first, and then got this one, finally got to a place where I could revise this book and get it where I wanted it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to explore your experiences a bit because, like,
Hmm.
this obviously short stories and essays are totally different beasts than
Yeah.
novels. So, how did you like transfer to that switch mindset, switch projects,
Mhm.
switch approaches? Like, how did they compare? Were there like any big lessons learned, stuff like that?
Yeah, this it is completely different. It's completely different going into it. Going into this book, I knew I wanted to write a novel. I had never tried to write a novel before. I'd always done just short pieces, but I had this conceived as a novel. I had the timeline and the trajectory that I wanted to happen and how I wanted to move it through time laid out in my head. Um, and it's a big commitment and a big project and hard getting feedback on it throughout the whole process because some people, especially during like workshops and stuff, if people haven't read the beginning of it and you're trying to workshop the middle of it, it's a little trickier. And so it was yeah, it was a large commitment and a big project, and I'd never done it before. I wasn't sure how to tackle it, and it was a learning process. And then for the baddest girl on the planet, like I just wanted to write a short story at first, just to see what happened with Evie's marriage and how she destroyed it, because I knew she was going to blow it up. Um, and then, like, I wrote another one and another one, and at some point I realized that I was writing another book, which I didn't want to do that for a while because it was hard, and I wanted to do short stories again because it's easier. It's not easier, but easier in the short
It's a
term.
different it's a
It's a
different
different
easy.
a different
Yeah.
animal. I wanted the like the contained little container where you could just write it and be done, like move on,
Yeah,
instead of
like,
committing to like
outside of your comfort zone because 'cause you're used to doing it in the container and being done, and then
yeah,
for
yeah,
these 2, I'm glad you chose to do it in more expansive story because I could tell
yeah.
that there was more to Charlotte, and I didn't read The
Mhm.
Baddest Girl on the Planet. There obviously, I could tell there was more to Evie too.
Yeah, yeah. It's the way they came together too, like Evie's story, it goes back and forth. The timeline changes, the point of view changes. It's not chronological. I wanted it to be such sort of this patchwork quilt once I figured out that I was writing another novel. But her character, this is the way her story had to be told, I thought. And like I said, like I had the sort of growth of her character mapped out in my head a little bit more and how I wanted it to go. And I was just trying to write towards that, whereas Evie was um, being discovered as I went. So it's a different process.
Oh,
Very
that's so
different.
interesting. Are you
Mhm.
I don't know, what do they call them? Like, outliners versus
Like
pantsers?
plotters and
So
pantsers, yeah.
yeah.
I'm not both.
So then what did was Evie a plotter and then maybe Charlotte was a pantser, or was it
It was
how
the
did that go
opposite.
for you? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Evie was totally a pantser, but within the pantsing, I would have certain things laid out within the container with a little chapter I was trying to tell. I would have, okay, here's the characters I haven't addressed. Here's like themes I haven't touched on, and here's sort of rough idea of what I wanted to happen. But then it just evolved. And Charlotte was more um like I knew how I wanted to break up the timeline, and I knew what locations I wanted to use, and I knew kind of stuff like that a little bit more. So it was much more plotted in that fashion.
Yeah, that's interesting because that makes sense though, because you did start out with Charlotte's story,
Yeah.
and then that was, like, more planned, but then I
Hmm.
guess Evie
Yeah.
just didn't leave you alone. It was
He
like
would not leave me alone. Like, I thought I was done, and then I was like, "Eh, I just want to do one story," and then she would not leave me
Mhm.
alone. She just kept at it, but that's her personality. So.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's why I say I liked all your characters, even if I feel like it's not uncommon to have a friend to have an unplanned pregnancy. Like so many
Right.
people, if they have not had an unplanned pregnancy, they probably know someone who has. It's just a
Absolutely.
matter of what age, like at what point in your life
Right?
that will determine how they're going forward. And yeah, it's
Mhm.
they run away and then hoping that she can rely on her best friend and her family to have some stability or something that she's comfortable with that
Mhm.
she has always been able to rely on. And then Evie's surprised, and then she's got her own shit to deal with, and then now Charlotte inevitably has to, like, be that person for her, and,
Yeah.
but she wants to be, though, but
Right.
it's just she doesn't she's not in the mindset to, like, put others first.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really hard
yeah.
for her.
And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the tension of the novel came to me. That's what I built it around, was just the idea of these two friends in these drastically different places and phases of their lives that are equally these dividing lines of before and after, these massive life changes, and how they are trying to be there for each other like they want to be, um but like how hard that is and what a challenge that
Yeah.
is to do that when you are in these two different states of mind.
And it's so different because one's
Mhm.
dealing with a loss and one's dealing with,
Yeah,
for lack of better words, a gain.
a gain, yeah, exactly. An unplanned gain.
Yeah, so I thought that was so interesting, especially just with, like, best friends. It's,
Mhm.
"Oh, like, I wanna be there for you, but I'm dealing with my own shit," and vice
Yeah,
versa, and
and
yeah.
they're both having that, I think. Like, they both wanna be there for the other one, and they both have their own shit to deal with, and it's just, yeah, this, like, meeting and exploding, but can the relationship withstand?
Yeah.
And, like, the romantic love factors in and becomes part of what is going on. But for me, the story was always Evie and Charlotte and their relationship and their love story and how their friendship fares throughout this time.
Yeah, I like that because it's
Mhm.
obviously romance, uh, people love romance and people like
Right.
that little tidbit in there. It's, "Oh, it's a story about grief and loss and kind of coping," but then you got that
Mhm.
romance, and so I think that's
Yeah.
always gonna draw a little more interest and engagement,
Mhm.
but then I feel like the friendships, the platonic friendships are so crucial, and they
Yeah.
could tell so much about just as much, if not more about, like, the character and how that person
Mhm.
is approaches life. I don't know
Right.
because you never know, like, how you might react to something or how you might deal with something until, like, it comes, and
Mhm.
life doesn't care, and it's just life doesn't care, it's just here, this is gonna happen and Godspeed kind of thing.
Yeah.
You
Good
gotta
luck.
deal with it, you can't plan with it, you can't plan for it, you can't, like, I don't know, prepare or train for it. It
Yeah,
just
yeah,
happens,
no.
and then this is what you've got. And yeah,
Yeah.
I enjoyed how you juxtapose those like two, like the female friendship, but like the two completely different points in their life and the
Mhm.
frustration that comes with that. It's
Right.
like they
Right.
want to be understanding, but
Mhm.
Charlotte's kind of she's hiding things. She's possibly because she doesn't really know what to make of it herself.
Right.
So she's
Mhm.
and then but other people see it, other people
Yeah.
notice it, and it's just that elephant in the room, and I
Mhm.
no, I really enjoyed it, and that's part I'm right there with you. It's no, I love the hot mess, I love the
Yeah.
chaos. I love throwing your characters into, like, just situations to see how is this gonna turn out? How are they gonna deal
Yeah.
with it? What's gonna speak to you as an author? Was
Mm.
this character gonna stand by, or is this maybe a surprise is gonna happen? You never know. I love that.
Mhm.
Yeah. But exploring that further, start off with so you got, like, the whole some of the characters and their relationships, there's, like, a lot of oceanography going on, little
Yeah.
marine life factoids, all that, but also, like, just with grief and the real
Mhm.
human emotion and the psyches and the context, and so I wanted to explore, like, your research process. Was there anything that you
Yeah,
had to
yeah.
dig into just to
Mm.
make sure it was authentic or just get the feel of things and get your brain flowing or just anything that you needed clarification on? And then did you
Mhm.
approach it the same way that you do with your other works, stuff like that?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes and no. I didn't start out heavily researching it. It was more this explore friendship and I wanted to explore grief. And that's like thematically what I went into the story with. And then during revision, I absolutely dug into research. During the revision process, I was trying to find other ways to like get into the story and get into the mindset of the characters without saying, "Oh, she was really sad," or, "Yeah, she was really into him," and so I've always loved sort of the science of the world, and obviously, I'm not a scientist, but one of my friends loaned me this book called How to Read a North Carolina Beach, and I was just, like, flipping through it, and it was scientifically poetic and so interesting the way that these just, like, very natural processes and these scientific explanations for them could, taken out of context, be like metaphorical, have metaphorical aspects in and of themselves. And so I started working them in and I was just like made a nice list of the ones that I really loved and started figuring out how to bring that in. And so I would fall into it every time I used something, I would read about it and try and figure it out and figure out how it played into it. And I love doing that. I love pulling in outside stuff. I would like with the other book, I would have like tons of tabs open all the time, researching like pigeons and lobsters and Mike Tyson,
Going down the rabbit hole, like
going down
one
the
tab
rabbit
opens
hole, and
and
like you
like you
never
you
know what you're
might
gonna
find it click on another
find.
tab to click on another tab, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You never know what you're gonna find that's gonna spark some kind of inspiration. So yeah, it
Pocket it
was
for another story.
exactly. This gets interesting. I love bringing in outside stuff that you don't think would make sense in that story, and then working it in somehow. And I just think it's really fun. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely it wasn't I didn't start off with it, but it definitely became a big component.
Yeah, I like that you found a book and it just seemed to work. It just seemed to
Yeah.
fit. And because I've never my family and I we just made a trip to Myrtle Beach, North
Mhm.
Carolina, and so I was familiar with that area. But
Yeah.
so yeah, I would guess I was just curious, is that location you're
Mm.
just really familiar with and that's why you
Yeah.
chose that for such a significant place for your characters?
Yeah, that was another I was thinking as I stopped talking, I was like, "Well, I should have mentioned the research on the area." So, like, the research on the area itself, I was always trying to get it right, making sure I had it right. But yeah, I grew up going camping down there when I was a kid. Like, every summer we would drive down and go camping. And so I grew up being really familiar with the area, and I just loved the area. I love the Outer Banks. I love Hatteras Island. So when I started writing, I would set my fiction there, set my little stories there. But when I started writing this book, I was like, I knew I had to set it there for a multitude of reasons, but the sort of so I set it there for the beauty of the location, just like being able to have that in descriptive language, and then the isolation. So it's this place where you go away from everything else. It's literally out in the middle of an ocean and you can't escape yourself. So she can't escape herself there. And then on another level, which I kept uncovering more and more of as I wrote, on another level, metaphorically, it's a barrier island. It doesn't stay in one place. They're not meant to. Ecologically, barrier islands, they're not meant to stay in one place. They're meant to
Okay.
move. They bear the brunt of hurricanes and nor'easters and storms,
Okay,
and like
gotcha.
that's their job, is to take the hits and protect the mainland. And just the idea that a place like this exists where it constantly visibly changes in front of your eyes, and being able to use that in fiction where you're trying to work your characters toward these realizations and your characters are changing and growing and not being the same, like having that be able to play in on so many different levels, it's just really fun. And it's so rich that I never get tired of it. And there's so much history there, like so much history and so many stories. You got like pirates and you have World War II submarines and you have these terrible
Yeah.
storms and heroic rescues and all this drama and excitement, all on this place that literally moves from day to day. Like it literally shifts and changes. And so
That's
like
probably why it has just so much action, so many different stories to tell.
so many different stories to tell. Uh,
Yeah, that's so cool. Hey, who knows? You might have a couple more stories coming out based on some ideas that you get just from facts that come from what you're researching. That's so cool. I like that. Yeah. I think geography and just historical places or even just sentimental places for the authors. They can mean so much and it's just another avenue to invite readers in and introduce readers and just to share your sentimentality with just
mhm.
sprinkle it in there.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So we mentioned before, this story is like basically it's about grief.
Mhm,
Charlotte's grieving. She's or trying to run away from dealing with the grief of losing her father, and like
mhm,
also it's such a formidable like on the cusp of coming of age, like the cusp
mhm,
of like big changes where she should be focusing on school and going
right.
the course ahead as planned, and then this
Mhm,
happens, and then she also feels that pressure because her dad wanted her to
mhm,
continue on and do what she was like, no, you got to do it, blah blah blah. He's and as a parent, you're like, okay, I understand, you don't want your kid to be like super halted by
mhm,
losing you, like just forge forward, but at the same time it's you got to like grief, like I said, it's not the same for everybody. It comes in
mhm,
waves and people
right.
deal with it in different it's a tricky thing because there's you want to be sensitive to it, but then you're also like, what's excusable, right? Like
Mhm,
what is
it
questionable, just like destructive behavior versus okay, they just need some space or they just need to get it. This is how they're coping right now. This whatever. So
mhm,
I want to explore that and how she like channeled that and how you approach that,
mhm.
because I imagine it was, like, delicate
Yeah.
for you, and I wanna pick your brain about how that was for you.
Yeah, it was like when I started writing it, like I said, like what I had in mind, what really prompted me to start writing was this idea of these two friends in these different headspaces dealing with these huge life transitions. And then I was like, I gotta make it this impulse in fiction to make it more interesting, more complicated. Like, what would happen if? What if she did this? What if she did this? And then what if this happened? And what was interesting to me was the way she's internalized things in her body, and I would always turn to that as I was trying to turn to description of it because like I said, it's you can't really write I was very sad, like you got to have something that's a little bit more visceral. So it was always how she carries it in her body. And then what would happen, I started to think, what would happen if she turned that outward and she roped someone else into this and discovers she can use her body in a different way, and a way that is, let's say, life affirming, in a way that is exciting and new to her,
Yeah.
and like the opposite of feeling numb, and the opposite of feeling lost, and the opposite of feeling disconnected from herself. And so that's where I started getting the ideas. And then she's going to make the bad decisions, and how much of, at some point, it's not just that she's grieving, it's that she's really into this other guy that she shouldn't be into.
Yeah.
Um, as especially as the months go on, and it's not
Yeah.
like at that point, yeah, she's not making great choices. But again, you don't want your
And even
protagonist
just
to make really good choices.
the messiness of it,
Yeah.
because it's just like the love triangle thing, but it's the
Hmm.
one of the interests is, like, she's known for years because he's been with her cousin. So,
Yeah, exactly.
you're like, "Oh, how what would happen if," and then I'm gonna make it
Yeah.
messier. You're like
And then I'm gonna make it even messier. Yeah, exactly.
But I
Because
yeah,
why not?
exactly like you said, I love the chaos, I love the messiness, and like you said, yeah, like, just make it a story, like, how would this and what would me as a reader, I was, "Girl, you do you," like, 'cause she cou you obviously she couldn't help it, like, she felt for one, Nate, and then but then she couldn't help no, she couldn't identify them for sure at first, like, she couldn't
Right.
ignore them, like, they just kept and I guess, like, I any human being could sympathize with that, where it's just it's if
Hmm.
you've ever really been honest with yourself and you're, like, with one person, you care about them, but then you can't help what your brain or what your emotions, where your mentality, what it notices, what your
Right.
body notices and is drawn
Yeah.
to, and it's and she's at war with herself over it, and it was just like, if
Yeah.
she could combine 2 of these men into
Yeah,
one.
exactly.
And yeah, and it was so fun, so hopping off of that because I like what you did with 2 of both of her love interests where it was like science versus faith. It was because Nate was very much
Hmm.
like he believed in his faith was very important to him, and it was integral to his life.
Right.
And then, Charlotte was like, okay, like, I don't know how I feel about
Yeah.
that kinda thing." And then
Yeah.
with Michael, she got that that was her outlet where she clicked with him
Hmm.
because it was, like,
Right.
about the science, it was about the facts, so I wanna explore that because I thought it was
Hmm.
really interesting how you played around with that and how you made a point to make those 2 parts of what either maybe she needed or what she wanted and didn't know what she wanted or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think partially, I think like for at least just for the romantic piece of it, like sometimes there are people who you think logically this makes sense. Logically, I should want to be with this person. And then there's like the completely irrational, illogical attraction you feel sometimes that sometimes doesn't make any sense and isn't good for you and isn't something that you should be pursuing, but nevertheless, like you said, it exists, and you're not going to ignore, and you may or may not ignore it. It's what you decide to do with it. And of course she decides to roll with it there. She's not going to make the smart choice. But I also did want to play with these ideas of faith and science and how they combine and how they intermingle or not, and where she stood at that point in time when the story starts, which is she has not only lost her father and lost her sort of stable seeming life of how from childhood this is where she is from, this is what she is like, this is who she is, and faith probably being part of that, and then suddenly it's all gone, and how that shakes her, particularly with a family who also prioritize storytelling and faith and all of that, but also science. Like her father was a geologist, and so she's grown up with these concepts, these scientific concepts, and she is going through this phase where if she's still thinking about God, if she's still believing in God, then she's really pissed off, and she's not what he's up to, and and Nate being like still very much a person of faith is just not sitting right with her right now because like I said, she's not okay with what she thinks is if there is a God, what the fuck, what's going on
Yeah.
here. So I think it was something along the lines of, so it was something like having someone who offers up this sort of science as solace, as like something that is comforting, rather than turning to faith as a comforting thing, where right now she doesn't want that. She's not doesn't know if she believes in that, and it just makes her even more angry. God won't send you more than you can handle, and you're like, "Mwah, fuck that."
Yeah, like, kind of those
Um,
comforting words that are
it
sometimes they land and sometimes it's no, like,
it
that
just
is
was
not,
like
yeah.
making things worse and not where her head is right now when she is lost and that any kind of faith that she had is just like been torpedoed right now. But when someone tries to comfort her or offers this comfort in terms of science and says something like that in a way that is unexpected, but using the natural world and these scientific processes as a way of saying eventually you will be okay, even if you're not right now, is somehow so appealing to her and so
Yeah.
fascinating. And yeah, I wish someone had said that kind of stuff to me when I was grieving. I wish it had been like, instead of, oh, lean on Jesus. And I'm like,
Uh
that's not where I am
Yeah,
right
you said it, I'm gonna unpack it. Did you
now.
if you feel comfortable talking about it, so that you
Yeah,
tapped
yeah, yeah,
into
yeah.
your own process of grief,
Yeah,
and I imagine, yeah, because obviously like I said, everybody deals with grief in different ways, and
right.
this past year, I dealt with something that was totally a loss of a loved one that was totally
Mm,
unexpected, and it's really weird to because it was my niece took her own life, and so that's just, like, a
uh,
whole 'nother it's really hard versus, like, someone dying from a natural illness or dying from an accident or dying but
mhm,
it's just a different type of sadness, it's a different type of loss because it's
right,
like, there was nothing we could do, kind of thing, like, that kinda gave us
right,
comfort because it was, like, just the nature of the mental health, it's a thing, and it just really seems like there was nothing we could have done to
right,
changed anything. Of course, you could say, "Oh, if they got in a car accident," you could say, "Oh, if I only had them stay 5 more minutes, or, like, things
right.
like that, but
Uh,
it's yeah, if I
yeah,
only made that phone call to check up on them.
yeah,
So, yeah, so it's I thought it was really interesting how you just, like,
mhm,
you immersed yourself in it and you tapped into that, and I wanna
mhm,
explore that, but also, like, you could tell the ocean and the waves and the whole
yeah,
environment, the location was such a huge part of how you approached your writing style, and so
yeah,
I love that because it made so much sense. It was like, yeah, grief comes in waves, and
right.
you don't have control over it sometimes. You could try your best,
No.
but it's gonna do what it'll hit you, and then it will
Mhm.
subside, and it'll hit you again, it will subside,
Yeah.
and yeah.
It's totally the waves, and it's like the powerlessness that you have in the face of it. It's just yeah, like as if I was it's not much of a metaphorical stretch to like see the ocean and the grief comes in the waves and just like back and forth and you could forget for a while and like your things are funny and you're having enjoying your day and then you're like, "Oh, you get smacked with it." And it changes over time. There's no
Yeah.
set you never know what's going to set you off or what's going to bring it all back, but just yeah, the and like you said this idea of great powerlessness. What can you do? You can't do anything. It's the science of the ecology and the science of it clicked in with me for that too. This is these processes that you have no control over and you're not going to be able to change them and this is how it works. But the great faith that you can find within that, I think is what's interesting to me and is like astonishing to me that you can find a sense of in what I think she eventually finds in through the science of it is this sense of connection to the world and within that finding her footing again and finding a sense of faith again and figuring out that they don't have to be opposed to each other that they can be tied together but yeah just the
Yeah.
this idea of grief is yeah it's just you are just you're just thrown in and there's no the only way out is through it and it's the waves yeah and so for that also yeah the setting and the environment played a big role when I was writing too yeah
Yeah, to find that comfort, to find, okay, what do I need right now? And then what can I
mhm
give right now? It's because you're not
yeah
you're ideally, you're not the only person that's affected. You're not the only person that's grieving.
mhm
Hopefully, you have a support system, people
right
who are also equally affected, or people who are going to be there for you, who and so, yeah, it's just exploring that and dealing with it, and I guess my mentality was like, it just in life, I just tend to accept for lack of better words, I just eat shit and move on. So, I'll deal with it and move on. I don't like, I come not to say I don't complain, I would say I complain, but I pride myself in being okay with being pretty good about adapting and adjusting and just dealing with the realities of life in a practical way. Just being like, "You know what? This sucks.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it sucks. Trust me. It's not, oh, just get over it. No, it sucks. Deal with
Right.
it." and then and then learn how to move on. Either if that's heading you wanna deal with it, do you wanna how are you dealing with it? You gonna deal with it head on? Are you gonna complain? Or are you just gonna be like, "You know what? I got bigger fish to fry." And then or
Mhm.
is this a part of life? Things like that. And but it's just when it's so unexpected or when it's a loss and it's so
Mhm.
hard to grieve. And there's
Yeah.
different types of loss, right? It's not just a loss of a
Mhm.
loved one, like, physically. It could be like, if you wanna dig into lo to breakups, you wanna dig up the
Yeah.
loss of friendships.
Yeah.
It's because
Yeah.
you play with that friendship in your book
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
because Nate one of her love interests is, her best friend's
Mhm.
brother who she has known, like, all her life. And, of course, I'm
Mhm.
thinking, like, "Nate, yes, you are perfect. Yes, you are, like,
Right.
book boyfriend material, yes." And then there's
Right.
also a Michael, like, the forbidden fruit. And so I think that's partially why I was like, "Oh, girl, I get it." And it was just like, if that was her outlet, it was like I couldn't
Mhm.
fault her for it. I was just like, "What are you gonna do? What are you gonna
What are
do?
you gonna
What's your
do?
move?" Yeah.
Right?
Handle this.
And again, like, and she's young. She's young, and she's maybe this is her first time really messing around with these ideas that, oh, I can get this guy if I want this guy, and I can get this
Mhm.
other guy if I want this guy too. It's not all her really way of dealing with her grief. Some of it is just Charlotte
Yeah.
being and trying to see what she can do.
Yeah, it's not like she was, like, looking for it, right? It just seemed to
Yeah,
happen.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
she wasn't being promiscuous or anything. She was there, like, "Hey, family who I've known for,
Yeah.
like, ever," you know? And it's
Yeah.
just
Well, the thing too is, you were saying earlier about how, like, hopefully you have people around you who are also going through this grieving process and you can do it together. And that was super important to me personally. And so when I was fiction, I thought, oh, what would happen if I took that away? What would happen if you didn't have that support system with you and instead you had your best friend who's in not a great spot and her parents who, like, yeah, you've known them your whole life, but like they're not your parents, they're not your mom who's in the same mindset. So like, what would happen? And this is what I came up with, like how to make it, how to make things worse for her.
Yeah. I love that. I love the way you look at that, but also it's because yeah, I love how you didn't forget about her mom and her brother. 'Cause her mom, I think she was acting like a widow. She was like, "I miss him," and blah, blah,
Hmm.
blah. She was checking on her daughter, and then her brother was like, "Yeah, by the just so you remember, you left. Like,
Yeah, just so you remember, I'm
you're the
really
one
pissed
who's
off.
not he" Yeah, you're the one who's not here anymore, and I
Yeah,
love
right.
that you included that 'cause it helps
Hmm.
to give the reader, like, insight and a little bit of holding her accountable, right? "Oh, no, it's not
Yeah,
okay that she
yeah.
just ran off."
It's not
There
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes like almost my favorite part and is when she starts to come out of the deep sort of cocoon of her grieving that is she's in the beginning of the book and like towards the three quarters towards the end, and she has to start being held accountable for things and taking responsibility for things that she screwed up and like how she's going to go about doing that made it interesting to me to explore. And then like, just like, what's she going to do? You got the guy you wanted to at the expense of hurting a lot of people, so what are you going to do now?
Right.
And having her have to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, because I imagine she hasn't been faced with these situations before.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, "It's your move, girl. You
Oh
made your
yeah.
bed.
Now
You
what?
gotta." Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm gonna throw this is a two-parter. I'm gonna throw this at you. What was the most challenging part to write, and then what was the most enjoyable part
Mhm.
to write?
Ooh, okay. So the most challenging was that last quarter of the book. That was the hardest to write. Like the beginning part, I wrote really quickly and really just fell into it. Maybe not entirely true. I reworked it a lot, but once I locked into how I wanted it to go, like that seemed to like the mood and the setting and the winter on the island that kind of flowed really easily. And then the next section did too. And then like I hit this point where I'm like nothing is working. This is all terrible. And then the more climactic parts, they were stressing me out, and I just let them fall flat at first because it's causing me way too much anxiety. I had Michael just left for a while, and she was like, "Oh, never mind, that's okay." And I realized it was, no, you can't do that. You can't just be like, "Never mind." And then let's see, what was the second part of that question? The most
Oh, and
enjoyable
most
part?
enjoyable. Yeah.
Uh-huh. It was always really fun writing scenes with Evie and with Evie's Aunt Faye. And then I loved, as I was rewriting, the hardest part when I was drafting, like that the ending bits that I let fall flat, when I was rewriting them, it was a lot of fun to rewrite them. And once I moved past the point of freaking out about it, it was fun to write it once I figured it out. And I'm like, yeah, you got to go there, you got to do it.
You,
And then it
like,
was
you
fun.
allowed yourself to take care of what one thing at a time, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can do
Yeah, like,
this.
you allow yourself to enjoy it because you've crossed things off your to-do list type of thing. And that's
Yeah,
what it seems
yeah,
like.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's so fun. I love it asking authors that because it's really interesting as a reader to read the story, and then
Uh-huh.
sometimes you can tell, oh, they seem like they had more fun with this part, or they seem like they put more work into this part because they they were just trying to make it work because yeah, it was a challenging part because it demanded more, and you couldn't quite figure it out at first.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
And further, I wasn't there. Like I wasn't ready to do it, ready to make it work, and then finally I got there.
yeah. Yeah, no, you're not alone. I've talked to when I do these interviews, I talk to
Hmm.
authors who are like, I just had to come back to it. Another kind of two-parter. What advice do you have for Charlotte? What advice do you have for Evie?
Oh Lord! Oh God!
I'm
Okay,
sorry. I
advice
wish
for
I could like
Charlotte.
freeze that reaction from you because that was the perfect. You were like, "Oh, what?"
Ah! Oh man. Well, my advice for both of them is to take and I think this is why they are friends. I think each one of them has something that the other one lacks, and they need to tap into that a little bit more. So Charlotte needs to get out of her head a little bit more, out of her overthinking, out of her poeticizing, and take action on things and do stuff and not overthink it. And Evie needs to take it back a notch and maybe slow down, maybe overthink a little bit more, and maybe don't say everything that comes into her mind. I think that's why it's so funny to me that they are they're so similar in some ways and so completely opposite in other ways, and I think that it's really funny. It's really interesting because friendship works despite or because of them being like fairly opposite and yet with this core inner sense of similarity. So yeah, I would just say Charlotte needs to get out of her head a little. Evie maybe needs to get back in.
Yeah, I love that too, and I could totally relate to that because I have multiple friendships, or I think a lot of people have multiple close
Hmm.
friendships, and it's just yeah, I have
Yeah.
a really close friendship to someone who I'm not like at all, but like the
Yes,
somehow
yeah.
somehow it works, and then there's a really close
Hmm.
friendship I have with someone who's I totally almost see eye to eye with them, like, on everything, and
Yes.
that's also obviously
Hmm.
that's an easy explanation of why it works. So it's I think,
Yeah.
yeah, there's something to say there where it complements or
Hmm.
matches, and, like, people can be so multidimensional, and that's why you wanna make characters
Yes.
multidimensional, because where it's yeah, like, they love each other, but they're also, like, they're forced to think about themselves, and where does that lead
Yeah,
them
yeah.
in their own journeys? Yeah, yeah,
Mhm, absolutely, and I
I
have
love
those
that.
relationships too. I have these multiple close friendships, and some of us are very different, and sometimes we're very much the same. And it's just, and there's such important relationships in my life, and I just love to celebrate that in fiction and in writing, and write about these women's relationships and how support each other, or not sometimes, but how they
Yeah,
are there for each other, and like just the impact and the importance of those friendships and how they last, and how it becomes a choice to maintain them, particularly for Evie and Charlotte not living in the same place for
yeah.
most of their friendship. They have to choose to be friends and they have to work at it. And so it just becomes this sort of relationship that has this
Yeah.
like deep level of importance, but that's
I
just
like
not
how you
familial
phrase
and it's
that
not
where they
romantic.
like it doesn't come
Yeah,
natural, they have to work at it, and
right. They have
that
to
adds
work
its
at it.
own significance, yeah.
Yeah,
Something
because
that
it's
just
like
comes
that's the
natural,
reciprocity.
yeah, yeah.
Right, because just like sitting next to the person in school or something. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely,
But
yeah.
they
Because
just
one of my
to stay connected.
like, when I yeah, because what I was talking about, like, one of my friendships that my best
Mhm.
friend, I've known her since, like, 6th grade, so we're 12 years old, and so it's, like, over
Yeah.
20 years
Mhm.
now, and I can't it's, like,
Yeah.
maybe, like, where we've grown into such different people, but I can't imagine my life without her, and
Mhm.
I feel so comfortable just telling her anything, like, without even with or without judgment. If she's gonna judge me, I feel comfortable having her
Right.
judge me, and even if not, and then
'Cause
there's
maybe you
another
needed
friend
that.
who
Maybe
I
that's what you needed.
yeah, yeah, because she like, we just there's a reason why we've maintained a relationship over 20 years,
Mhm.
and then so there's and then
Yeah,
another best
exactly.
friend of mine, like, we maybe since high school, so it's a little less than 20 years, and but still, it's like
Mhm.
she matches
But
that other
still.
yeah, she matches that other part of me
Mhm.
where I can explain things to her, maybe I'm, like, self-conscious about, and she's, "No." Like, "What? Yeah, that's not
Yeah.
weird." Like, she's, "No," like, "What do you mean?" You know? And then so that's yeah,
Right.
it's just I feel like there's just such value in the friendships because it's not intimacy or a
Mhm.
romantic relationship, and it's not familiar relationship. It's like a friendship that, yeah, you
Right.
have to work at, and it's not you're not obligated. It's not like okay, I'm forced to see this
Right.
person at Christmas, or I'm, like, forced to build a life with this person.
Mhm.
It's no, like, those I feel like there's something special to
Yeah.
say about the work that goes into friendships, absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love to bring that into fiction and explore that and all of those themes 'cause I think it is really deeply important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so just a couple more questions. So, what this might be another heavy question.
All right.
What do you hope, readers get out of The Saddest Girl on the Beach?
Oh, man. Well, gosh, what I hope they get out of it. It's a I imagine it as this sort of literary beach read. I hope they get out of it a sort of fundamental picture of the setting and the place and feel like they were there. I really hope that the place connects. I really hope that they connect with the mindset of grieving. And I think, other than that, just exactly what we were talking about with the importance of friendship and these platonic, super important relationships. So that's mostly, I picture it, yeah, as this literary beach read, like a beach read, but with a little bit of, I don't know, teeth or something.
Yeah, a little bit
A
heavier.
little bit, yeah, a little bit
Like,
heavier,
it
but
if
still.
you're currently grieving, like, it may or may not be time for you. You may or not
Yeah.
yeah, you may
Mhm.
be ready to you may be looking for it, or you may be like, "No, I'm not ready for this."
Yeah, and I think you'll know right off the bat if it's like something that you can read or you can't. Because if it's just because at some point it, I think, will be helpful, but if it's not your time to reconnect with that, then put it in a drawer and wait.
Yeah, or oh, something I also
Mhm.
wanted to tap into. You was tap grief from a 19-year-old. I realized we didn't
Yeah.
explore that. Like,
Mhm.
how did you do that? Like, how'd you put
Yeah.
yourself in the mindset? Because obviously, when I was 19, I was thinking
Right.
like, yeah, there was a certain level of maturity and self-awareness, but there was also like a lack of
Mm.
life experience. So, how
Yeah.
did you like tap into that?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was my one of my, like, "How can I make this worse?" thoughts, 'cause
I love
I
that.
lost my dad, and eventually I was ready to write about it, but when I didn't wanna write again, I didn't wanna write, "I lost my dad, and I'm really sad," so I wanted to make it a novel, I wanted
Yeah,
to make it fiction, but I was like, "How could I what would make this even worse?" Because I wasn't 19, I was much older than that, but it was such a blow and such a, like, before and after and such a, like, destabilization. But yeah, that was my impulse. That's when I knew I was ready to write about it, when I was like, "How can I make this worse?" Yeah, what if? What if this happened when you were 19 and you didn't even really know who you were? You didn't have that life
yeah,
experience and you have this, like you said,
yeah.
you have this level of independence and you have this level of being able to take care of yourself, but you don't have life experience, and then suddenly you're dealing with this incredibly destabilizing event, and then you decide to leave your family who's also grieving. Like, whoa, what a shit show that's gonna be. Wouldn't that be fun to write about? Wouldn't that be like
Yeah.
that's sort of
I
how I
feel like
because
you
like
could
yeah.
almost live vicariously through Charlotte a little bit, just to be like, what
Yeah.
how maybe
Mhm.
without if the reins were off, if I was totally left free
Yeah,
to just lash out and grieve however I wanted to, yeah, I would go run off
exactly.
to an island off the East Coast.
Wouldn't you just run off to an island? I would just if you had no other responsibilities, which she doesn't because she's 19. I'd be like, no other
Yeah.
responsibilities, and you would just any way you could grieve, you would just run off to an island and run around with some
Honestly, I'm
boys.
like,
And
any way I can grieve. I've got a family, I've got a full-time job, plus this thing, like, I would still run off.
yeah,
If
yeah.
it was really that much for me, and if I felt like that's what I needed, I would be like, "You know what? Life is gonna go on. Everybody's gonna survive if I disappear for a few days." Even though she disappeared for,
Go.
like, a few months, but still,
Like
life is gonna
months, yeah.
yeah, and that's the kind of, like, reality of it. It's I don't know. I'm like,
Yeah.
you know what? If I come off as an asshole, I'm sorry, but I'm just focusing on myself, and I'm not trying to
Yeah.
ruin everybody's anybody's life.
See.
Yeah, it's I admired Charlotte. I was like, "No, that's totally understandable. You do you, boo." But then when she started getting
Mhm.
to these questionable
Right.
behaviors with, like I said, eyeing the forbidden fruit, even though she had, like, a perfect Prince Charming
Mhm.
who was just
Right.
doing what he thought she needed, and I was
Yes.
like, "Nate."
Oh yeah, I did. I felt so bad about what she did to Nate that in the baddest girl on the planet, Nate gets his happy ending. So you'll have to check out one of the chapters in the middle of that book
Yeah,
so you can because I felt so bad to
then,
have
yeah,
his
maybe
Nate
I'll listen to
gets a
that.
chapter.
Okay, that's good. Because 'cause I'm like, Nate deserves a woman who wants him. He deserves a woman who's
He
fully wanting
does.
to receive everything that he has to offer. Yeah, he's I
Because
was
he's
good
such a
that's
good
what I was
guy.
saying, like,
He's such a good guy.
he's on the cusp of the book boyfriends list, like, straight up. If it was more
Yeah.
like a
Mhm.
romance-focused story, he would flourish. That I love that. Just trials and tribulations of making the perfect man. I don't know.
Yep, exactly. Just stitch them together. It would be great.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. Okay, Heather Frese, what is next? Are you working on anything that you could talk about?
Oh. Yeah, well, I was working on essays for a while, so several essays are up or forthcoming to go with this book, but then I am working on another novel, and I have Evie and Charlotte will not leave me alone. I really thought that it was these two, and that would be it. These two companion novels, but now there's a third one in the works where I want to see what happens to them in middle age and beyond. I want to see what happens when they are not these kids anymore, and when they
Yeah.
Evie ended up with these responsibilities early, but when Charlotte has the responsibilities and what happens if they decide to make a little compound and live at the beach together and see how that shakes out. So it's
Yes.
slowly in progress, but it is in
No, I
progress.
take the time that you need. I love that. I love that idea because I imagine I would love to know how middle-aged Evie and Charlotte are doing and how baby Evie is doing, baby adult Evie is doing,
Yeah.
and how she's dealing with having an adult
Yeah.
child. It's I would love to
Yes,
see that.
I
That's so
know.
cool.
It's
Yeah,
gonna be so
even
cool.
if
That's
it's
something I
just
really, really want to play with.
yeah, even if it's just something for, like, yourself and just to have tucked away for later and ready for later
Hmm.
to present to the world when you're ready to do it. That's
Hmm.
fantastic. I love that. Where can we find you online and on social media?
I am on. I think I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter and TikTok. Everything's at Heather K. Freeze. That's where you can find me.
So, Heather Frese, the saddest girl on the
Okay.
beach, that's available now. Thank you so much. This was such an enjoyable conversation. I loved diving deep into serious topics and just like shooting the shit about the messiness of
Mhm.
it. And if you ever want to come back, feel free to reach out. I love to chat with you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. Yeah, I would definitely love to come back.
And there you go. That was Heather Frese talking about The Saddest Girl on the Beach. That book is available now. Check out the show notes where you can find links where to purchase the book and where you can follow Heather on social media and her website. While you're browsing online and on social media, please go ahead and find Cantina Book Club and give me a follow. It really does help me out and help me reach more readers like yourself, more listeners like yourself. And if you need book recommendations, you can always reach out to me or just keep tabs on the website. I'm always posting new reviews there. Please follow me on TikTok and YouTube. I'm playing around with video content, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys can check that out and let me see what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, all that good stuff. And if you are seeing that authors that you like and you find books that you like, it really does help them out if you give them a rating and review on Goodreads, on Amazon, and wherever else you rate your books. But as always, thank you guys so much for listening.